Los Angeles International Airport was still buzzing close to midnight, bathed in a sterile glow that made the polished floors gleam like glass. The loudspeaker droned overhead, announcing last calls for late-night flights, while travelers dragged suitcases through the terminal like sleepwalkers. In the middle of the crowd, Calantha Carter pushed a baby stroller with one hand, pulled a carry-on with the other, and tried desperately to soothe her 6-month-old daughter, Lily, who was crying with a raw, relentless wail. Lily, it's okay, sweetheart. Mommy's here, she whispered, her voice frayed from exhaustion. The baby's tiny fists were clenched tight, her face flushed red as her cries echoed through the gate area. A few passengers turned to look, some with pity, others with irritation. A woman muttered something sharp about mothers who can't control their babies, loud enough for Calantha to hear. Heat rushed to Calantha's cheeks, but she didn't have the strength to respond. This was Lily's first flight, and Calantha's first flight in over a year. The last time she'd flown out of Los Angeles, she'd been a carefree college student. Now, she was returning as a single mother, broke, sleep-deprived, and holding her entire world in her arms. When the boarding announcement crackled through the speakers, she gathered what little strength she had left, adjusted Lily's blanket, and joined the line. By the time she found her seat in Economy 17B, her nerves were already stretched thin. The cabin smelled faintly of plastic and reheated coffee. The overhead lights cast everything in a soft amber hue. Lily's cries grew louder as the plane filled up, bouncing off the walls of the cramped space. The man in the seat beside her glanced up from his sleek laptop. He looked to be in his early 30s, dressed in a dark tailored suit and crisp white shirt, his hair neatly combed back. There was something about him composed, self-assured, but not cold. His eyes shifted from Lily to Calantha, observing quietly, without judgment. "I'm really sorry if she bothers you," Calantha mumbled, already bracing for a complaint. "It's all right," he replied in a calm, deep voice. He closed his laptop and set it aside. "It looks like you could use a break." She let out a tired, breathless laugh. "A break, a vacation, a miracle. I'll take anything at this point." The plane began to taxi down the runway. Lily's cries escalated into frantic sobs, her little body arching in discomfort. Calantha tried everything, rocking, humming, shushing, but her hands trembled from sheer fatigue. She felt the stares on the back of her neck like pinpricks. Then, the man leaned slightly closer. "May I try?" Calantha blinked. "You know how to calm babies." A warm smile touched his lips. "More than you might think." She hesitated only a moment before handing Lily over. To her surprise, he supported the baby's head perfectly, cradled her against his chest, and began to sway gently in a steady rhythm. His movements were confident but tender, as if this wasn't the first crying baby he'd ever held. Then, in a low, steady baritone, he started to hum Brahms' lullaby. The soft melody wove through the hum of the engines like a warm blanket. Within less than a minute, Lily's cries softened, hicced, and stopped. Her little eyelids fluttered shut, her fists relaxed, and she melted into his arms. Calantha stared at the scene in disbelief, her heart twisting with both relief and something deeper, something she couldn't quite name. "Well," he said with a faint smile, still rocking Lily gently, "looks like you can rest now." She let out a shaky laugh. "I don't even know your name, and I already owe you my life." "No debt," he said simply. "I just can't stand seeing someone that tired." The cabin lights dimmed as the plane climbed through the night sky. Calantha adjusted her seatbelt, watching Lily sleep soundly against the chest of a stranger. His presence was oddly reassuring, not pitying, not intrusive, just solid. The scent of his clean cologne lingered faintly in the air. Her eyelids grew heavier with each passing minute. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to exhale. Before she realized it, her head had tilted to the side, resting gently against his shoulder. He didn't flinch. Instead, he shifted slightly to give her a more comfortable angle, his expression unreadable but soft. Around them, the cabin grew, quiet engine hum, distant whispers, the rhythmic breathing of sleeping passengers. But in their little row, something quiet and extraordinary was happening. A young woman, exhausted and alone, a stranger with steady hands and a voice like velvet, a baby finally at peace. And above, the sleeping city. Somewhere between Los Angeles and Chicago, a fateful story was quietly taking flight. In-flight conversations. Calantha woke to the gentle shift of the plane leveling out above the clouds. For a split second, she forgot where she was. The low hum of the engines, the dimmed cabin lights, The faint scent of recycled air and colonol of it settled around her like a half-remembered dream. Then she felt it, a firm, warm shoulder beneath her cheek. She straightened abruptly, mortified. "Oh my God, sorry," she whispered, brushing her hair back. The man beside her turned his head slightly, amusement flickering in his dark eyes. "Don't be, you looked like you needed it." Her gaze dropped to Lily. The baby was still fast asleep in his arms, her tiny hand clutching a wrinkle of his suit jacket. Calantha exhaled a soft, shaky laugh. "I can't believe she's still out. Usually she wakes up the moment I stop moving." "She's a fighter," he said with a quiet smile. "But even fighters give up eventually." Something in his voice made her look at him more closely. He wasn't just being polite. There was a calm steadiness to him, like someone who'd held a crying baby more than once. Someone who understood chaos and didn't flinch. She reached for Lily carefully. "May I?" He handed the baby back without hesitation, adjusting his posture so she could cradle her daughter comfortably against her chest. "Thank you," she murmured, "for everything. That was, honestly, I don't even have words." "You don't need any," he said. "You've got your hands full as it is." Calantha gave a small laugh, more genuine this time. She tucked Lily's blanket around her, then turned toward the window. The plane was gliding over a sea of clouds, moonlight painting the surface silver. It was strangely peaceful up here, like the world below didn't exist for a while. After a few quiet minutes, she spoke again, her voice lower, more vulnerable. "I wasn't always this tired, you know. I used to think I'd travel the world, live in New York, maybe become a photographer. Then life." She shrugged softly. "Life happened." He didn't interrupt. He just listened, his hands resting loosely in his lap. "I got pregnant my junior year of college. The father left as soon as I told him. I dropped out, started working double shifts at a diner to save money for diapers and rent. It's been a lot." She glanced down at Lily, her expression softening. "But she's worth it." He nodded slowly. "She looks like she knows she's loved." That simple statement made something in her chest tighten. So few people saw past the surface. The crying baby, the messy hair, the budget stroller, to see the love underneath. She tilted her head, studying him. "You're different. Most people either look at me with pity or annoyance." "I don't do pity," he said, his gaze steady. "An annoyance seems like a waste of energy." She smiled faintly. "So what do you do?" He hesitated, as if considering how much to reveal. "Then, I work in business, mostly projects that support communities. You could say, I keep busy." That was vague, too vague, but she didn't push. After all, he was a stranger, and maybe, just for this flight, it was nice not to have to explain everything. They fell into a rhythm soft conversation punctuated by the occasional glance at Lily. Calantha told him about growing up in a small California town, about her parents' quiet disapproval when she got pregnant, about the bittersweet decision to attend her younger sister, Isabella's wedding in Chicago despite their strained relationship. "She's my little sister," Calantha explained. "We were close, but things changed when Lily came along. I guess she didn't know how to deal with it, and I didn't either. It's been 2 years since we last saw each other." "That must be hard," he said. "It is, but it's her wedding. I'm not going to let our past ruin that for her, even if it means staying in a cheap motel and pretending like I've got everything under control." She laughed, but the sound carried a tinge of sadness. He studied her for a moment. "You know, not everyone would do that. Most people would avoid the discomfort. I guess I'm not most people." "No," he said softly, "you're not." The way he said it made her heart skip unexpectedly. She turned toward the window again, hoping he wouldn't notice the sudden warmth in her cheeks. Somewhere over the Midwest, the cabin lights dimmed further, and most passengers drifted into sleep. Their row, however, felt like its own quiet island in the dark. Their voices softened, grew more personal. She told him about Lily's first laugh. He told her about a childhood spent moving around, hinting at struggles but never going into detail. When she teased him about being so mysterious, he simply smiled and said, "Some stories are better told over time." For the first time in months, Calantha felt truly seen, not as the tired mom with the crying baby, but as a woman with dreams, flaws, and a story worth listening to. As the plane began its slow descent hours later, she realized she'd told more to this stranger than she had to anyone in years. She wasn't sure why, but it felt easy. Natural. The seatbelt sign dinged on. Passengers stirred awake. Calantha adjusted Lily, now awake but calm, and turned to him one last time. "I never got your name." He extended a hand, his smile small but genuine. "Franklin. Franklin Smith." "Calantha," she replied, shaking his hand. "It was nice talking with you, Kalantha." "Yeah," she said softly. "It really was." The landing, the captain's voice crackled through the intercom, announcing their descent into Chicago. Cabin lights flickered back to a soft gold, and the quiet hum of sleeping passengers shifted into the restless shuffling of people preparing to land. Kalantha blinked awake from a light doze. Lily was nestled against her chest, warm and drowsy, her tiny fingers curled around a lock of her mother's hair. Beside her, Franklin was fastening his seatbelt with practiced ease. He caught Kalantha's sleepy glance and offered a small, knowing smile. "Almost there," he said. She nodded, glancing out the window. The dark sky was breaking into a faint gray blue, and clusters of lights below outlined the grid of Chicago's streets. It struck her how beautiful the city looked from above, quiet and almost peaceful, like it was holding its breath. Lily stirred, letting out a soft whimper. Kalantha gently rocked her, whispering soothingly until the baby settled back into her half-sleep. Franklin watched the exchange quietly, that same steady calm radiating from him. "You're really good with her," she said suddenly. His brows lifted. "With Lily, yes. Most people get tense the second they hear a baby cry. You didn't." He looked out the window, his profile catching the first traces of morning light. "I guess I just know what it's like to need help," he said after a moment. Something in his tone, quiet but weighted, made her curious. She opened her mouth to ask more, but the plane jolted slightly as the landing gear deployed. The moment slipped away in the bustle of final descent. When they touched down, applause rippled faintly through the cabin from a few enthusiastic passengers. Kalantha smiled despite herself. She always thought the clapping after landing thing was silly, but right now, after a long night, it felt oddly fitting. People began to stand, reaching for overhead bins, impatient to disembark. Kalantha stayed, seated, waiting for the aisle to clear. Maneuvering a stroller and a baby through a chaotic rush was not something she had the energy for. Franklin remained seated, watching calmly as people squeezed past them. "You don't seem like someone who likes waiting," she remarked. He chuckled softly. "You'd be surprised." Once the aisle thinned, he stood and lifted her carry-on down for her without asking. It was a simple gesture, but the ease with which he did it made her chest tighten unexpectedly. "Thank you," she murmured. They filed out together, moving slowly through the jet bridge and into the arrival terminal. The air felt colder here, tinged with the scent of industrial coffee and disinfectant. Lily was fully awake now, curious eyes darting around at the new environment. As they reached the end of the terminal, Franklin stopped and turned toward her. For a moment, they just stood there in the morning light spilling through the glass wall. To people who had shared a strange, quiet night together. "I should give you this," he said, slipping a hand into his jacket pocket. He handed her a business card, thick cream-colored, the kind that spoke of understated luxury. She hesitated before taking it. Their fingers brushed briefly. "Don't usually give these out on planes," he added, almost soft, "but I'd like to keep in touch, if you'd like." Kalantha smiled politely, still a little dazed from the long flight. "Sure, thank you, Franklin." He gave a small nod, then glanced at Lily, who was now chewing determinedly on her blanket. "Take care of this little warrior," he said, warmth threading through his voice. "I always do." A boarding announcement blared nearby, cutting through the moment. When Kalantha looked up again, Franklin had already stepped back, joining a man in a suit who seemed to be waiting for him near the VIP corridor. He gave her one last look, quiet, lingering one before disappearing into the crowd. Kalantha adjusted Lily in her arms, tucked the business card into her purse, and headed toward baggage claim. The terminal was brightening with the rising sun, casting long strips of light across the polished floor. She felt oddly light inside, like she'd shared something meaningful with a stranger, even if she couldn't quite define what it was. She waited for her bag at Carousel 7, rocking Lily gently. To kill time, she pulled the business card back out, running her thumb over its embossed letters. The weight of the cardstock alone screamed expensive. She finally looked at the name and title printed in clean, bold type: Franklin Smith, Chief Executive Officer, Smith Global Enterprises and Smith Philanthropic Foundation. Her breath caught. She'd heard of Smith Global. Everyone had. It was one of the largest privately held conglomerates in the country: real estate, technology, global charity programs. Franklin Smith wasn't just some kind stranger. He was the Franklin Smith, billionaire philanthropist, the man often photographed standing beside senators, giving speeches about social impact, funding women's shelters and education programs. Her heart hammered against her ribs. All those calm, humble answers on the plane: business, community projects. He'd deliberately avoided telling her who he was, but why? Her mind spiraled through the possibilities. Maybe he'd just wanted a quiet flight. Or maybe she'd been a story to him from the start. A tired young mother on a late-night flight, a perfect heartwarming. She shook the thought off, trying to focus on Lily. But the seed of doubt had been planted. By the time her bag appeared on the carousel, her pulse had settled into a confusing mix of gratitude and unease. She tucked the card deep into her purse, zipped it shut, and whispered to Lily, "Well, sweetheart, looks like we met someone important." Lily responded with a soft coo. Oblivious to the weight of the revelation, Calantha hoisted her bag onto the stroller handle and walked toward the exit, unaware that the real storm, the one that would test everything she'd felt on that flight, was waiting just outside the terminal doors. The viral post, the baggage claim area, was already buzzing with the chaotic rhythm of morning arrivals. Suitcases thudded onto the carousel in uneven intervals. Travelers clustered around the rotating belt like a restless tide. Calantha maneuvered Lily's stroller to a quiet corner, away from the impatient crowd, and exhaled a tired breath. Lily was wide awake now, right off to the long flight. She kicked her feet happily, chewing on the edge of her blanket as if the night's crying fit had never happened. Calantha leaned over to adjust the straps on the stroller, brushing her daughter's soft hair back from her forehead. "We made it, baby girl," she murmured, trying to summon a smile. "One piece." Miraculously, her phone buzzed in her pocket. At first, she ignored it. She was too busy scanning the carousel for her scuffed navy suitcase, too busy keeping Lily's little hands from reaching for the metal railing. But the buzzing continued to. 3, for notifications in quick succession. Frowning, she pulled out her phone. The lock screen was a flood of alerts from social media. Mentions, tags, direct messages from people she hadn't spoken to in years. Her stomach tightened. She swiped open the first notification and froze. At the top of her feed was a blurry photo of her and Franklin on the plane. She recognized the moment instantly. Lily nestled in his arms, Franklin's calm profile against the dim cabin light, and her own exhausted head resting on his shoulder. The caption read, "Billionaire Franklin Smith holds baby to sleep during midnight flight. Heartwarming moment melts the internet. Hashtag good guy Franklin. Hashtag modern hero. Hashtag wholesome moments." Her vision narrowed. Below the photo were thousands of likes, retweets, comments. Some were sweet. "This is so beautiful. Faith in humanity restored." Others were invasive. "Who's the mom? Anyone find her Insta yet? She looks poor. Franklin is such a saint." Her pulse pounded in her ears as she scrolled further. Multiple news outlets had already reposted the image. Someone had written a short article calling it the story America needs right now, describing Franklin as the modern-day Prince Charming. They described her, too, not by name yet, but with words that made her throat burn. A young, tired, single mother, lucky enough to find kindness in the sky. The unknown woman Franklin helped, surely a reminder of his philanthropic spirit. Lucky, unknown, a reminder. It wasn't just the picture. It was the narrative. A story was being built around her life without her knowledge or consent. A story where she wasn't a person, just a backdrop for Franklin's goodness. Calantha's fingers tightened around the phone. "Are you kidding me?" she whispered under her breath. A man next to her glanced briefly, then back at the carousel. She shifted away, her heart racing now. She scrolled to the comments section, hoping to find some corner of kindness. But the further she went, the more invasive it became. People speculating about Lily's father, some zooming in on the stroller brand. One user had already started a thread trying to identify the mystery mom. Her stomach churned. She hadn't even told half of her extended family she was coming to Chicago. She hadn't posted a single photo of Lily online. And now, thanks to one viral snapshot, the most intimate moment of her life, a stranger helping her during a vulnerable night, was public property. She looked up, scanning the baggage claim area with a growing sense of unease. Franklin was nowhere in sight. She thought about his soft smile on the plane, the way he'd avoided talking about his work, about the expensive business card tucked in her purse. Had he known? Had this all been part of some calculated image-building exercise? Her mind resisted the thought. He'd seemed so genuine, but the words from the article echoed, relentlessly. Billionaire Franklin Smith's heartwarming moment. Her phone buzzed again. A college acquaintance she hadn't spoken to in years had messaged her, "Oh my God, is that you with Franklin Smith?" She locked the screen abruptly, her hands trembling. Lily let out a soft squeal, kicking at the blanket. Calantha forced a shaky smile and crouched down to her daughter's level. "It's okay, baby. We're okay." But she didn't believe it. She spotted her suitcase finally and hauled it off the carousel, the weight grounding her. As she stacked it onto the stroller handle, she caught her reflection in a glass, wall-tired, messy hair, wrinkled clothes, dark circles under her eyes. Next to the slick, controlled image of Franklin Smith she'd seen on news headlines over the years, she looked like the perfect contrast, the unknown woman, the prop in someone else's redemption arc. Her jaw clenched, gratitude was slowly being replaced by something hotter, sharper. Betrayal. She navigated toward the exit with quick, determined steps. The icy morning air hit her the moment the sliding doors opened, snapping her fully awake. Somewhere outside, taxis honked and tires screeched. Travelers hurried past, clutching coats and coffees. She adjusted Lily's blanket against the chill, mind spinning. She didn't know if Franklin had orchestrated the post. She didn't even know if he'd seen it yet. But right now, none of that mattered. What mattered was that the most vulnerable part of her life had been broadcast to the world, and his name was in the headline. And that, Calantha thought grimly, was not something she could ignore. The confrontation, the cold Chicago air rushed over Calantha as she stepped outside the terminal, her breath forming faint clouds in the early morning chill. The sky was a pale gray now, the sun not fully risen, casting everything in a washed-out light that made the pavement gleam like steel. Taxis honked, engines roared, and the smell of exhaust mixed with the sharp bite of winter. She pulled Lily's blanket tighter around her, maneuvering the stroller toward the taxi line. Her pulse still hadn't settled since she saw that viral post. It beat against her ribs like a warning drum. As she scanned the curb for an available cab, her gaze landed on a familiar figure a few yards away. Franklin. He stood near the black car service area, talking quietly with a man in a tailored suit, likely his assistant. Even from this distance, he had the same composed air she'd noticed on the plane. His dark overcoat fit him perfectly, his hair unruffled despite the wind, his posture straight and assured. For a brief, irrational second, relief flickered in her chest at the sight of him. Then the image of that headline snapped back into her mind. Billionaire Franklin Smith holds baby to sleep. Her throat tightened. She hesitated. She could have walked away, called a taxi, disappeared into the city without a word. But the anger bubbling under her skin wouldn't let her. She pushed the stroller toward him. "Franklin?" He turned immediately at the sound of her voice, surprise flickering into something warmer. "Calantha," he said, taking a step toward her. "I was hoping I'd see." Cut him off, holding up her phone. The lock screen still displayed the viral photo, now with a banner of breaking news from a major outlet. "Did you know about this?" He frowned, confused at first. "What is it?" She unlocked the screen and thrust it toward him. His eyes scanned the headline, the photo, the caption. For a heartbeat, his face was unreadable. Then he let out a slow breath, rubbing the back of his neck. "Didn't know someone took a picture," he said. "This is the first I've seen it." Her voice came out sharper than she intended. "Really, because it looks a lot like a perfectly staged photo. Billionaire CEO, kind stranger, helpless mom. It's the kind of story PR teams drool over." Something flickered in his expression, not guilt, but surprise at the accusation. "You think I planned that?" "I don't know what to think." The frustration and humiliation from earlier surged to the surface. "All I know is that a private moment I didn't agree to share is all over the internet, and your name is on every headline." "Calantha," he began, calm but firm. "I didn't orchestrate this. I was just holding Lily. Someone must have taken the photo without us noticing." She let out a bitter laugh. "Of course, and now the whole world gets to look at me like some charity case you rescued mid. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? People are digging into my life online already. Strangers are speculating about who I am, what kind of stroller I use, if I'm grateful enough for your kindness." Franklin stepped closer, lowering his voice, but not his resolve. "I understand why you're upset." "No," she snapped. "You don't. You're Franklin Smith. You're untouchable. For you, this is just a sweet story on a news feed. For me, this is my life. My daughter's face is out there. My face, without my consent." His jaw tightened, but not in anger, more like someone trying to find the right words in a storm. "I didn't want this, Calantha. I didn't even know it happened. And for what it's worth, I would never use you or Lily to polish my image. That's not who I am. Her heart gave a painful twist at the sincerity in his voice, but the wound was fresh, and trust didn't come easily. "You'll forgive me if I don't just take your word for it," she said quietly, the anger thinning into something rawr-hurt. A silence stretched between them, filled with the sounds of taxis pulling up and people calling out to drivers. Franklin exhaled, his breath fogging in the cold air. "I get it," he said finally. "You don't know me, but I promise you, I didn't set this up." She shook her head, overwhelmed. "I can't do this right now." Before he could say anything else, she gripped the stroller handle and turned away. Lily let out a soft, questioning coo, as if sensing her mother's turmoil. "Kalantha," but she didn't stop. She walked toward the taxi line, not looking back. Franklin stood there as the driver loaded her suitcase into the trunk, his hands buried in his coat pockets, his expression shadowed. Their eyes met one last time across the busy curbside. There was no anger in his gaze, just confusion, and something that looked dangerously close to disappointment. She climbed into the cab, shut the door, and told the driver the address of her motel. As the car pulled away, she cradled Lily against her chest, whispering softly, "We're okay, baby, we're okay." But deep down, she wasn't sure she believed it. The motel and the taxi ride from the airport to the motel took nearly 40 minutes, cutting through the quiet, early morning streets of Chicago. The city was slowly waking up, bakery lights flickered on, a few joggers passed by in hoodies, and the golden glow of street lamps softened against the steel-blue dawn. Kalantha sat in the back seat, one arm protectively around Lily, who had fallen back asleep during the ride. Her other hand lay limp in her lap, her phone screen still dark but heavy with the weight of that viral post. Every bump in the road echoed the thudding in her chest. She'd tried to convince herself in the cab that she was overreacting, that Franklin might truly have had nothing to do with the photo, that maybe it was just some nosy passenger. But the truth was, it wasn't just the picture. That shook hurt was the reminder of how quickly her life could be rewritten by people who didn't even know her name. And she hated how a part of her wanted to believe him. The cab pulled into the cracked parking lot of the Motel Esquat, aging building tucked between a shuttered diner and a discount tire shop. The neon vacancy sign buzzed faintly, casting a pink glow over the worn concrete. Kalantha paid the driver, hoisted her suitcase with practiced exhaustion, and maneuvered the stroller toward the front office. The smell inside the lobby was a mix of stale coffee, cleaning chemicals, and something faintly musty like old carpet that had seen too many winters. A sleepy clerk handed her a keycard without making eye contact. "Room 217, checkouts at 11. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. The elevator was out of order, so she climbed the narrow stairwell slowly, balancing the stroller and suitcase like she'd done it 1,000 times before. Her legs ached from the flight, her shoulders from carrying too much both physically and emotionally. Room 217 was small, dimly lit by a single lamp on the nightstand. The beige curtains were stained, the bedspread patterned with faded A heater hummed loudly in the corner, struggling against the morning chill. She laid Lily gently on the bed, surrounding her with pillows for safety, and sat on the edge of the mattress. For a moment, she just stared at the wall, not thinking, not moving, just numb. The adrenaline from the confrontation at the airport was fading, leaving behind a deep, hollow ache in her chest. She reached for her phone and opened social media again. Against her better judgment, the photo was still everywhere. More articles now, even a short segment from a local news channel. Someone had written, "The mystery mom hasn't been identified yet, but people are already calling this the most heartwarming story of the year." Mystery mom, Kalantha Carter, 23 years old, single mother, former photography student, waitress, sister, daughter, woman, all of it flattened into two words: mystery mom. She set the phone down abruptly, pressing her palms against her face. Her eyes burned. A soft whimper came from the bed. Lily stirred, fussing in her sleep. Kalantha leaned over, rubbing her tiny back in soothing circles until she settled again. That simple act one she'd done countless nights alone brought a small anchor of reality back to her. She whispered, almost to herself, "It's just you and me, baby, like always." But the words didn't bring comfort this time. They sounded tired, heavy. A knock at the door startled her. She froze for a second, heart skipping. No one should know she was here. She opened the door cautiously. Isabella stood in the hallway, wrapped in a cream coat, her brown hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. She held a paper cup of coffee in one hand, her eyes widening when she saw Kalantha. "Cal, she breathed, as if saying the name pulled something old and fragile out of her. Kalantha gripped the doorframe. How? How did you know where I was? I called Mom, Isabella admitted softly. She told me you were flying in. When I didn't see you at the house, I guessed you might be here. You always hated staying with us when things got tense. The honesty disarmed her more than she expected. She stepped aside reluctantly. Come in. Isabella entered the small room, her eyes flicking to Lily, asleep on the bed. For a brief second, something warm and almost wistful crossed her face. She's gotten so big, Isabella whispered. She's 6 months now, Kalantha said quietly, folding her arms across her chest. They stood there in the cramped room, years of unspoken tension filling the space between them. Two sisters who once shared secrets under bedsheets, now barely able to hold eye contact. Isabella broke the silence first. I saw the news, Kalantha stiffened. Of course you did. The whole world did. I didn't know they'd post something like that, Isabella said carefully. But, Franklin Smith, Cal, don't. Kalantha's voice cracked like a whip. Don't say his name like he's some kind of miracle. I don't even know him. Isabella set the coffee down, her expression softening. I didn't mean it like that. I was surprised. I know how careful you are with Lily. Kalantha sighed, collapsing onto the chair near the window. I thought it was just a flight, just one night of help from a stranger. But now, it's everywhere. And I don't even know how it happened. Isabella sat on the edge of the bed, near Lily, but not too close. Her voice lowered. He came to see me this morning. Kalantha's head snapped up. What, at the house? Isabella continued. He asked if I knew where you were. Said he'd been looking for you since you left the airport. He didn't seem like a man trying to clean up a PR mess, Cal. He seemed worried, genuine. The words struck somewhere deep, where doubt and hope collided. Isabella hesitated, then added softly, he told me about his mom, how she raised him alone, how he started some of his programs because of her. I don't think this was a stunt. Kalantha stared at the peeling wallpaper, her throat tightening. I don't know if I can believe that. Maybe you don't have to. Not yet, Isabella said gently, but don't shut yourself off so fast that you miss something real. Something in Isabella's voice steady, older sisterly. Even though Kalantha was the elder maid, her chest ached. For the first time in years, their conversation wasn't sharp. It was fragile. Honest. Outside the city had fully awakened. Car horns echoed faintly. The heater hummed. Lily shifted in her sleep, unaware that her mother's world was tilting in quiet, significant ways. Sisters and old wounds. A motel room had grown warmer, the heater's steady hum filling the silence between the sisters. Morning light filtered weakly through the beige curtains, softening the edges of the cramped space. Kalantha sat in the chair by the window, legs drawn close, her fingers nervously twisting the hem of her sweater. Isabella remained on the edge of the bed, careful not to disturb Lily, who slept peacefully between them like a silent witness to a history neither woman had fully unpacked. For a long moment, neither spoke. The years of distance between them hung heavy like dust floating in a sunbeam, visible but untouched. Finally, Isabella broke the silence. You look tired, she said gently. Kalantha let out a dry laugh. That's kind of my default look now. Isabella didn't smile. No, I mean, it's more than that. It's like you've been carrying the world on your shoulders for too long. Kalantha stared down at her hands. Maybe because I have. The weight of her own words settled between them. Isabella shifted closer on the bed, resting her elbows on her knees, mirroring the posture they used to share during midnight talks as teenagers. I know we haven't talked, Isabella began slowly, choosing her words with care. Not really. Not since everything happened. And that's on me too. Kalantha's throat tightened. Isabella, no, let me say this. Isabella's voice trembled, but she held Kalantha's gaze. When you got pregnant, I didn't handle it well. I was jealous, angry, confused. You were always the strong one, the dreamer, the one who left town to chase something bigger. And then suddenly, you had something I couldn't have. Kalantha frowned. What are you talking about? Isabella took a shaky breath. 2 months before your pregnancy, I had a miscarriage. The words hit Kalantha like a slow, heavy wave. She sat back, eyes wide. As memory she hadn't fully understood at the time rushed back. Isabella's sudden coldness, the fights that seemed to come out of nowhere, the wedding invitation she never answered, all of it made a brutal kind of sense now. I didn't tell anyone, Isabella continued, her voice quiet but steady. Not Mom, not Dad, not even you. I didn't want to be the broken one. And when you showed up with Lily, I was happy for you on the surface, but inside, it ripped me apart. I took that pain and turned it into distance, into anger. I made you the enemy because it was easier than facing what I'd lost. Tears pricked at the corners of Kalantha's eyes. She hadn't expected this, not here, not now, in a cheap motel room at sunrise. "Why didn't you tell me?" she whispered. "I was scared," Isabella admitted, "and proud. I thought if I pretended to be fine, I could make it true. But all I did was push you away." Silence filled the room again, but this time it was different, warmer, softer, like air after a storm. Kalantha leaned back in the chair, her heart aching with something complex. Grief for what they'd lost, but also relief that the truth had finally surfaced. "I hated you for so long," Kalantha said quietly. "Not because you pulled away, but because I didn't understand why. I thought you looked at me and saw a mistake." Isabella's eyes filled with tears. "I saw someone who had what I couldn't, and I hated myself for feeling that way." They both laughed softly through the tears. The sound cracked but real. Lily stirred, let out a small sigh, then settled again, as if giving them permission to continue. After a moment, Isabella reached out, hesitantly, like she wasn't sure she still had the right. Kalantha hesitated only a second before taking her hand. Their fingers intertwined, naturally, like they always had. "Before everything got complicated, Cal," Isabella said, her voice low but steady, "don't let what happened online stop you from seeing what might be real." Kalantha sighed, resting her head against the chair back. "You mean Franklin?" "Yes." Isabella squeezed her hand gently. "I saw him this morning. The way he talked about you, it wasn't like a man doing damage control. It was like someone who'd met a woman he didn't want to lose. I know sincerity when I see it." Kalantha let out a tired, skeptical laugh. "You've always been a romantic." Isabella gave her a look. "No, I've become a realist. And reality is, not every man would spend hours trying to track down a woman he met on a plane. Especially a billionaire with a PR team that could have spun this story however he wanted. But he came himself. That has to mean something." Kalantha's chest tightened. She remembered the way Franklin had held Lily, not awkwardly, not like someone trying to earn praise, but naturally. She remembered the softness in his voice when he talked about needing help once, the way he'd listened to her without judgment. Those moments had felt real, and that was the problem. "I don't know if I can trust him," she admitted. "I barely know him. And everything about his world is so big, expensive, public. I'm just trying to keep my head above water." Isabella nodded slowly. "I get that. But maybe trust doesn't have to mean deciding everything right now. Maybe it's just giving him a chance to explain." Kalantha let out a long breath, closing her eyes. The idea of facing Franklin again filled her with equal parts fear and a strange, fluttering hope. She didn't want to name. "I'm not promising anything," she said finally. Isabella smiled faintly, a warmth in her expression Kalantha hadn't seen in years. "I'm not asking you to. Just don't run before you even know what you're running from." For the first time, in what felt like forever, Kalantha didn't feel like she was carrying the weight alone. The rift between them wasn't magically healed, but it wasn't bleeding anymore. And that was a start. That as the morning sun finally broke through the thin motel curtains, casting light across the small room, Kalantha glanced at Lily sleeping peacefully between them. Her world was shifting quietly, slowly but undeniably. The wedding 2 days later, the city gleamed under a crisp, cloudless sky. Chicago in early spring carried that electric sense of renewal, trees budding, the river glinting like polished glass, and a soft breeze that hinted at warmer days ahead. Kalantha stood at the edge of the hotel ballroom, clutching her small evening clutch a little too tightly. She could feel the low thrum of nerves beneath her skin, a restless rhythm that no amount of deep breathing seemed to settle. The ballroom was breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers hung like constellations from the high ceiling, scattering warm light across polished floors. Round tables were dressed in ivory linens, gold-rimmed china, and vases overflowing with white roses and calla lilies. A string quartet played softly near the grand staircase, their music curling through the air like silk. It was the kind of place she used to see in magazines when she was a teenager, the kind of setting that belonged to other people. People who wore designer gowns, not clearance rack dresses, carefully ironed the night before. She smoothed the skirt of her navy blue cocktail dress, the one Isabella had insisted on lending her. "It suits you," her sister had said that morning with a grin that was half teasing, half proud. Kalantha hadn't been sure, but now, under the chandeliers, she almost believed it. Lily was with their mother upstairs in the bridal suite, sleeping soundly. For once, Kalantha had both hands free, though they felt strangely empty without the stroller in front of her. Isabella appeared at her side, radiant in her simple yet elegant bridesmaid dress. Her hair was pinned up in a loose chignon, her cheeks glowing with excitement. "You look beautiful," she whispered. Kalantha rolled her eyes lightly but smiled. "You're biased. You're the bride's sister." "Exactly," Isabella said, "which means my opinion carries more weight." The sisters shared a quick, quiet laugh, something that had become surprisingly natural again over the past 48 hours. Their late-night conversations at the motel had peeled away years of misunderstanding, leaving space for something tender and real to regrow. "Are you nervous?" Isabella asked softly. "About the wedding, or about the other thing?" Kalantha murmured. Isabella gave her a look. Both Kalantha exhaled slowly, glancing across the glittering room. "Yeah, a little." A murmur rippled through the crowd as new guests entered through the double doors. Kalantha followed their gaze and froze. Franklin had arrived. He stood at the entrance like the room had been waiting for him. His black tuxedo was flawlessly tailored, the crisp white shirt beneath highlighting the sharp lines of his jaw. His dark hair was neatly combed back, but a single strand had fallen slightly forward, an imperfection that made him seem unexpectedly human amidst all the elegance. He spoke briefly with a couple of businessmen near the door, shaking hands with easy confidence, but then his gaze swept the room once, twice before landing squarely on her. For a heartbeat, the ballroom noise dulled into a distant hum. His eyes locked on hers, and something unreadable passed through his expression. Surprise first, then warmth, then something quieter, deeper. Kalantha's breath caught. She hadn't seen him since the confrontation at the airport. The memory of her sharp words still sat heavy in her chest, mixed with guilt and uncertainty. But the look on his face now wasn't cold. It was hopeful. Isabella nudged her gently. "Go say hi." Kalantha shot her a look. "Are you insane? At my sister's wedding?" "Exactly," Isabella said. "It's romantic." Kalantha shook her head, laughing softly despite herself. "You've been watching too many movies." "Maybe," Isabella whispered, "but sometimes life surprises you." Before she could protest further, Franklin began moving toward her, long, confident strides cutting through the crowd with ease. People greeted him along the way, but his attention didn't waver. It was as if, in a room full of people, she was the only one he saw. Her heart thudded harder with each step he took. When he finally reached her, they stood just a few feet apart. For a moment, neither spoke. The air between them was taut with all the things left unsaid. The quartet shifted seamlessly into a soft classical piece, the notes rising like a soundtrack to their silence. "You came," he said at last, his voice low, carrying a hint of disbelief and relief all at once. "I said I would," she replied softly. His eyes softened. "I wasn't sure if I'd see you again." Kalantha hesitated, searching his face for traces of rehearsed charm or calculated ease, but all she saw was sincerity, layered with something tentative, like a man careful not to scare away something fragile. "I wasn't sure either," she admitted. A small, genuine smile touched his lips. "You look beautiful." Heat rose to her cheeks before she could stop it. "You clean up pretty well yourself." Their shared laugh broke the tension just enough to let something warmer in. Isabella, sensing her work here was done, slipped away to tend to bridal duties, leaving them standing near the edge of the dance floor, caught in a pocket of quiet amidst the glittering celebration. Franklin's gaze lingered on her, as if trying to memorize her in this moment. "I wanted to find you after the airport," he said carefully, "but I didn't know where you were. And then, everything online got worse." "I know," she said softly. "I saw it all. I didn't plan any of that, Kalantha. Not a single thing, I swear." She nodded slowly. "I know you didn't, at least. I want to believe that." Something flickered in his eyes, something like hope reigniting. Before either of them could say more, the wedding coordinator's voice rose above the music, announcing the bridal procession. Guests hurried to take their seats, the murmur of conversation fading into expectant quiet. Franklin stepped back slightly, his voice low. "Can we talk after the ceremony?" Kalantha hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, we can." As they moved to their respective seats, Kalantha felt her heart fluttering with a mixture of nerves and something dangerously close to anticipation. She wasn't sure what she'd say later. She wasn't sure what she wanted. But for the first time since that flight, she wasn't just reacting, she was choosing to face it, and that, in itself, felt like a quiet shift inside her. The hallway outside the ballroom was quieter. lined with gilded sconces and tall floral arrangements that smelled faintly of jasmine and roses. It was a welcome contrast to the laughter and music behind the doors. Calantha stood near a window, her hands clasped together, heart still beating unevenly from everything that had happened since she'd arrived. Franklin followed a few steps behind, careful not to crowd her. When she finally turned to face him, her expression was a fragile mix of defense and curiosity. "You wanted to talk," she said softly. "Yes," Franklin answered, his voice steady. "Not as the CEO of Whitmore Industries, not as a man people write about, just me." She waited. He drew a slow breath. "When I saw you at the airport, I wasn't planning anything. I was just a guy on a plane who couldn't watch a mother struggle alone. When I realized who you were after, I panicked. I didn't want you to think I had some agenda." Calantha's jaw tightened slightly. "But that's exactly how it looked. Articles, cameras, hashtag. I know how stories like mine get turned into someone else's PR. I know," he said quietly. "And I hate that you were right to think it. My communications team posted that photo without asking. I had it taken down within an hour, but it was too late. That's why I've spent the last 2 days trying to find you, not because of optics, because I needed you to hear the truth from me." Something in his voice cracked slightly, the steel giving way to something human. Calantha crossed her arms, not to block him, but to hold herself together. "You think I'm going to believe that just because you say it?" she asked, though her tone had lost some of its sharpness. He shook his head. "No, I don't want you to believe anything you don't feel is true. I just want to tell you why it mattered to me." He stepped closer, but not too close. "I grew up with a mom who worked 2 jobs. We lived in a 1-bedroom apartment. There were nights she came home so tired she'd sit on the floor, holding her coffee mug like it was the only thing keeping her upright. But she never let me feel small. She made me believe we had a future. When I saw you on that plane, exhausted but still holding Lily with everything you had, I recognized that look. It wasn't pity, it was familiarity." Her throat tightened unexpectedly. She wasn't prepared for this. Honesty that didn't come wrapped in pity or grandeur. "Don't want to be someone's inspirational headline," she whispered. "You won't be," he replied immediately. "I don't want a headline. I want a chance to know you, the real you, and I'll accept whatever answer you give me, even if it's no." They stood there in the hallway, suspended between the distant hum of music and the quiet honesty between them. Calantha exhaled slowly, some of the tension in her shoulders easing. She didn't fully trust yet, but for the first time, she believed he might mean what he said. "Okay," she finally murmured. "I hear you." Franklin nodded, as if that simple acknowledgement meant everything. "That's all I wanted tonight." She glanced toward the ballroom doors, where laughter spilled out like light. "We should go back in." He offered a small, respectful smile. "After you." When they stepped back into the reception, the room was awash in warm light. The band had slowed its tempo to a graceful ballad, and couples filled the dance floor, swaying under the golden chandeliers. The contrast from the quiet hallway made Calantha's pulse quicken again, not out of fear, but from something else she couldn't quite name. Franklin turned toward her, his hand lifted slightly, tentative but confident. "Dance with me," he asked softly. Her first instinct was to decline. She hadn't danced in years, not since prom nights and half-forgotten weddings, but his expression wasn't pressuring, just open, as if he were offering her a choice rather than a performance. She surprised herself by nodding. "Okay." He took her hand gently and led her to the edge of the dance floor. When his other hand found the small of her back, her breath caught, not because it was too forward, but because it felt natural. Their bodies settled into the rhythm, as if they'd done this before. The music wrapped around them. Conversations faded into a soft hum. Calantha's head rested just below Franklin's chin, and for a moment, the world shrank to the space between their breaths. She could smell the faint trace of his colloquial, understated, and feel the quiet steadiness in his movements. "You're good at this," she whispered. He smiled against her hair. "I had a good teacher once. She told me to let the music lead, not my ego." She laughed softly, the sound surprising even herself. It wasn't a fairy tale moment. It was real, grounded, quiet, the kind of moment that didn't demand to be photographed. As the song ended, Franklin didn't let go immediately, and neither did she. His thumb brushed over her hand, once a small, wordless gesture that said everything his speech hadn't. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For asking." His smile softened, something warm flickering in his eyes. "Anytime." They stepped off the dance floor together, the night continuing around them. The dance hadn't solved everything, hadn't promised forever, but it had anchored something between them, a shared breath, a beginning. Penthouse sunrise. The ride up to Franklin's penthouse felt strangely ordinary. A black SUV moving through streets that still carried traces of the night's festivities. Calantha sat in the back seat, Lily quiet in the carrier on her lap. And beside her, Franklin's presence was calm and steady. A kind of quiet anchor that had become familiar over the past 48 hours. He didn't fill the silence with small talk. He let the city lights pass by like a moving photograph. And she felt oddly grateful for that. When the elevator doors opened on the top floor, Calantha's breath caught. The penthouse was everything the word suggested, and then more. Clean lines, windows that curved with the city's skyline, a living room that poured light into the space even in the pre-dawn hour. It smelled faintly of cedar and coffee. Franklin moved with the ease of someone at home in grand spaces, but there was nothing ostentatious about it. No trophies, no heavy displays, only thoughtful art, a few books on low shelves, and a simple crib by the window that felt out of place in a billionaire's apartment in the best way possible. "Let me get you a blanket," Franklin said, already crossing to a linen cabinet and returning with a soft throat. He draped it over Calantha's shoulders as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Lily blinked once, curious about the new room, then nuzzled closer to Calantha. The city behind the glass was still asleep, the river like a black ribbon, but the horizon was beginning to pale, a thin line of promise where night would yield to morning. Franklin poured 2 mugs of coffee, then handed one to Calantha. She accepted it with both hands, the warmth grounding her. They walked to the window and stood side by side, shoulders almost touching but not quite, watching the first light spread across the distant buildings. "It's beautiful," Calantha said, the words soft enough that they felt like her own private thought. "It always is at this hour," Franklin replied. "You get the city before it puts its armor on." He turned to look at her then, his face catching the pale glow. There was a seriousness in his eyes she hadn't seen in the ballroom, an honesty that made her feel exposed and safe all at once. "I wanted you to see it. The city looks different when you're not trying to be anyone else." She tipped her head slightly, lifting her mug to her lips. She stopped, unsure where to begin. Words had always been messy for her when the thing that needed saying was about the future, about choices, about children, about the way people's kindness could sometimes reshuffle someone's life without asking. He set his coffee down and turned fully to her. "We need to talk," he said plainly. "Not as a headline, not as a charity story, just honestly." "Okay," she answered, bracing herself. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was charged with possibility. "I don't want you to think I came into your life to fix anything," he began. "That's not what this is. I don't believe in rescuing people like they're broken objects. I don't believe anyone needs saving if they've already kept a little person alive on their own for 6 months, probably without a second to breathe." Calantha let out a sound that was half laugh, half protest. "You make hardship sound like a qualification." "It's not a qualification," he said, voice careful. "It's a recognition. I know what it's like to be on the other side of a story, to be the thing that cameras point at, the example people hold up and never really see. That's why I started the foundation, to build programs that actually work, quietly, without show. But that doesn't erase how complicated being the subject of kindness can feel. I'm not asking you to trade your independence for my help." She squeezed Lily's carrier handle without thinking. The baby stirred and let out a small sigh, then settled again. "I'm tired of being grateful like it's a debt," she said, low. "I know what people mean when they call me lucky in those articles. They don't mean it with any understanding. They mean it like an adjective, not a life." "I get that," Franklin said. "Listen, what I want, if you'll have me, is to be in your life as a partner. That word matters to me. Partner meaning, we make decisions together. I can offer resources, yes, but I want to offer myself in ways that matter to you. Help with childcare if you want it. Flexibility so you can keep working, or go back to school if that's what you want. Privacy when you ask for it, and never to make you a story." Calantha felt a warmth at his words, but she was also practical by force of habit. "That's a lot to accept," she said. "I don't want to be defined by what you can provide. I work, I'm tired, but I keep our life afloat. I don't want anyone stepping in and putting me on a pedestal I didn't ask for." "That's not my plan," he said. "I want to learn the things you do. How you make laundry seem like a ritual. How you quiet a baby in 2 seconds. Those are skills, not theatrics. I want to be here for Lily because I care about her, and I want to be here for you because I care about you. We can take small steps, no grand promises, just choices, everyday ones. Do you want me to stay for dinner? Do you want me to pick up diapers sometimes? Or do you want to tell me to back off if you need space? We build it together. Her chest loosened a fraction. There was a steadiness in the way he offered partnership, the absence of patronizing pity, the absence of obsession with public narrative. He seemed to understand boundaries, even when his life had afforded him power to erase them. Okay, she said finally, the word tentative and small. We build it together. Franklin's face softened in a way that made her stomach flip. He nodded as if the promise was both simple and sacred. Then he bent down to pick up Lily, who had opened her eyes and was taking in the new room with sleepy interest. Franklin brought her close, careful and gentle, and placed her on Calantha's lap for a heartbeat before she reached up and took her back. You can sleep here if you want, he offered, nodding to a plush guest room off the living space. No cameras, no fuss, just space. Calantha looked at the bed, at the empty sheets, at the bright morning city beyond the windows. The idea of a quiet place to rest without watching the clock sent a tiny, riveted hope through her. It wasn't salvation. It was a shelter, and she realized she could accept shelter without losing herself. I'll think about it, she said, and this time it sounded like the start of a decision, not a reflexive defense. They watched the horizon as sunlight widened into bands of gold. The city inhaled and exhaled. Somewhere below, people were beginning their day, above the skyline, in a penthouse that felt less like a fortress and more like a window. The three of them, Calantha, Lily, and a man whose life had been complicated in different ways, stood together and watched the world wake up. Morning arrived in the slow, tender way mornings do in places that belong to the beginning rather than the end. Light first bled at the edges of the windows, then poured in warm and embracing, chasing the pallor from the city and setting the river alight. When Calantha woke, she was aware of a soft pressure at her side, a rhythmic presence that felt almost like protection. She opened her eyes to find Lily tucked against Franklin's chest in a leather chair by the window. He had made a small nest of blankets around her, and was watching her with a look of such gentle admiration that Calantha's breath caught. The baby's face was open and unguarded, in sleep-soft mouth slightly parted, lashes like delicate shadows, and when she stirred, she remembered, in the slow, inarguable way a morning remembers itself, how far she had come. Outside, the skyline glowed in a quiet procession of glass and stone, and inside, the room smelled faintly of coffee and the clean linen of another night's rest. It was a domestic scene, absurdly ordinary and impossibly precious. A billionaire with quiet hands cradling a child that had, for months, been the center of Calantha's whole world. He did it without attention-seeking, without performance. He did it as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Calantha moved slowly, mind still shrouded in the soft fog of sleep. She sat up on the couch, smoothing the blanket around her knees. Franklin glanced over and offered a small, private smile. "Morning," he said, voice hushed as if they were conspiring against the day. "Morning," she answered. Her voice felt thicker than she'd expected. There was an intimacy here that had nothing to do with headlines. The way a person smiled when they saw someone else's ordinary half-asleep face, the small rituals that linked people together. She felt, suddenly, and with startling clarity, that those rituals were what mattered. Franklin reached out, setting a mug on the side table, and then lowering into the chair beside them. He didn't rush to apologize for the past or to promise an extravagant future. Instead, he folded his fingers loosely, letting the silence hold what it needed. Lily yawned, a little sound that made Calantha's heart melt, and then blinked awake. For a moment, she looked around with sleepy curiosity, then spotted Franklin's face and smiled a small, delighted smile that seemed to break a light inside the room. Franklin's eyes softened and he made a sound of pure, delighted surprise. "She knows you," Franklin said quietly, as if announcing a discovery. "She does," Calantha said, and the words came out more strained than she expected. She pushed a loose curl behind her ear and watched Franklin lean forward. "Mia's fingers know Lily's reaching for the softness of his beard." He laughed, soft and delighted, and lifted her onto his knee, where her little legs wiggled happily. They sat like that for several minutes, the three of them forming an odd, imperfect triangle. No cameras, no expectations, just light and warmth and the quiet thrum of city life below. Calantha felt something in her chest that wasn't relief or escape, but something steadier and more dangerous, possibility. Possibility that the life she carried dragged, fierce, stubborn, could be shared without being diminished. Possibility that love could be practical, a series of decisions and small courtesies rather than an all-consuming spectacle. She reached out and let her fingers brush Franklin's hand, a small contact, deliberate. He met her touch with a softness that felt like an agreement. They had not promised the moon to each other. They had not made vows or signed papers. They had merely begun a conversation that could be shaped into something lasting, and that felt like enough. Outside, a gull called over the river, and the sun lifted fully, spilling gold across the room. Lily laughed, a bright, gurgling sound that shattered whatever last bit of reserve Calantha clung to. She watched Franklin's face as he laughed back, and in the way his eyes crinkled at the corners, she saw a man who could be ordinary in all the best senses. Somebody who could put a child to sleep, who could make coffee, who could sit through the boring parts of life and not be dazzled by the rest. She let herself breathe, long and slow. "I never thought a flight would change my life," she said, the sentence a soft confession. "Funny, right?" Franklin replied. "Some things arrive like storms, others like trains. You never know." She smiled, a genuine, open smile that felt like the end of a long night. The city outside was moving into its morning rituals, trash trucks and delivery vans, and men in suits walking with a purpose. Inside, something smaller and more urgent had begun. The three of them, tentative and careful and hopeful, making a kind of home in the shade of the skyline. Calantha looked down at Lily, then at Franklin, and thought of all the nights she had carried a heavy world alone. She realized, with a clarity so simple it nearly startled her, that the world hadn't been only heavy, it had also been moving her, stepping, inch by inch, toward this morning, toward sunlight, a child's laughter, hands held without strings. From a midnight plane to a sunrise in a penthouse, the arc had been small but true. She set her chin down on her chest and let out a soft laugh, half disbelief and half joy. The new day felt like a promise, not a fix, not a miracle, but a beginning. Outside, the city shone. Inside, Lily squealed again, and Franklin's arms tightened, laughing along. Calantha watched them, and, in that simple, perfect domesticity, she allowed herself to believe that perhaps the hardest part of life had, at last, led her somewhere kind.